The front door shuddered under the weight of 12 suitcases, a cacophony of metal wheels and frantic voices that seemed to rattle the very plates in my kitchen. 5 days ago, I had undergone a complex spinal fusion, a surgery that left me with a 4-inch incision running down my back and a body that felt like it had been shattered and reconstructed. I was meant to be resting in the quiet of our home, not hosting a family reunion. Marcus stood in the center of the foyer, his face flushed with the kind of performative excitement he reserved for moments when he knew he was in the wrong. Behind him stood Aunt Sarah, her eyes already scanning the living room like a predator assessing a new hunting ground. My head throbbed, a dull, rhythmic ache that pulsed in time with the chaos they brought into my sanctuary. The pain was sharp, a reminder of the physical fragility I was struggling to overcome, but it was nothing compared to the cold realization that my husband had prioritized his need to impress his relatives over my medical recovery. I leaned heavily against the hallway wall, clutching my robe, feeling the stitches pull with every ragged breath. I watched them move past me, touching my things, claiming my space as if it were an abandoned property. Marcus finally looked at me, waiting for me to play the role of the dutiful, grateful wife. I looked at him, then at his aunt, and simply said, "You have exactly 2 hours. W. Byers." 2 weeks earlier, the silence in the surgeon's office had been heavy, almost clinical. I sat on the examination table while the doctor reviewed the scans, his voice calm as he explained the necessity of the spinal fusion. It was a serious procedure, one that came with a price tag of $8,400 out of pocket after insurance, and a strict mandate for 3 weeks of absolute rest to ensure the hardware settled correctly. Marcus had been there, or at least his physical form had. He spent the entire consultation staring at his phone, his thumb flicking rhythmically against the screen. When the surgeon mentioned the need for someone to assist me with basic mobility during my initial recovery, Marcus had finally looked up. He gave a quick, polished nod, the kind of dismissive gesture that signaled he had already checked out of the conversation. He saw my fragility as an inconvenience, not a medical reality. On the drive home, he started talking about how my extended recovery period was the perfect opportunity for his family to visit, conveniently glossing over the fact that I would be incapacitated. He spoke about his aunt and her brood as if they were guests at a gala, ignoring the physical limitations I was about to face. I watched him in the passenger seat, his profile sharp and uncaring in the fading light. I realized then, in the quiet of that office, that he wasn't planning on caring for me at all. The days that followed were a blur of intrusion. My house, once a place of order, transformed into a sprawling dormitory. With 12 relatives spread across the rooms, all 4 bathrooms were occupied from dawn until dusk, and the sound of shouting voices seemed to seep through every wall. The neighbors began calling by the second day, their patience wearing thin as the music and laughter continued well past midnight. I had lost count of the minutes of sleep I'd actually managed to get, but my internal clock told me it couldn't have been more than 15 minutes at a time. I retreated to the master bedroom, the only space they hadn't fully colonized, though I often heard them trying the handle while I was inside. Marcus was entirely absent, spending his days playing the generous host downstairs, leaving me to manage my pain medication and meals on my own. He seemed to relish the chaos, viewing it as a testament to his social standing. While they raided my pantry and tracked mud across the hardwood floors, I occupied myself with the quiet, methodical work of survival. I lay on the edge of the bed, my laptop open, tethered to my phone. I didn't spend the time crying or wondering how my marriage had reached this point of total collapse. Instead, I spent those hours in my bedroom, not crying, but drafting the document that would end their vacation. Like-dislike. By the 4th day, the tension had turned jagged. I had ventured into the kitchen to find a glass of water, my gait slow and measured, when Aunt Sarah cornered me near the stove. She was dressed in my silk robe, the one I kept for special occasions, and she looked at me with an expression of performative pity that barely masked her irritation. She didn't ask how I was feeling. Instead, she handed me a stack of dishes and informed me that dinner needed to be served by 7 for the entire group. She listed 3 explicit demands: a full roast, homemade sides, and a clean kitchen before they retired for the night. The audacity was so profound it almost felt like an physical weight. When I She told me I was being dramatic and that my recovery was simply an excuse to be lazy. As she stepped forward to force the plates into my hands, she slipped on the slick tile, and the antique plates shattered against the floor. Two of my mother's heirloom plates, things I had cherished for years, lay in jagged pieces near my feet. Sarah looked at the mess, then back at me, ready to shift the blame entirely onto my shoulders. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself against the accusations of incompetence, she began to shout. I simply picked up my phone and called Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson met me in the corner of my own library, his presence a stark contrast to the boisterous, uninvited energy currently tearing through the rest of the house. He had been our family attorney for over 20 years, and he looked at the situation with the cool, dispassionate gaze of a man who dealt in facts, not emotions. We reviewed the trust documents I had secured years ago, ensuring the house was shielded entirely from the reckless whims of a failing marriage. 5 years of meticulous legal protection lay on the mahogany table before us. Marcus had lived under the delusion that he was a co-owner of this legacy. But the paperwork was absolute. The deed belonged to the trust, and I was the sole trustee. Marcus was a tenant at best, and his guests were trespassing on private property that he had no authority to manage or share. Mr. Henderson handed me a single, crisp legal notice he had drafted, requiring only my signature to activate. It was the lever I had been holding since the day I realized the depth of my husband's betrayal. Watching his ink-stained fountain pen rest on the paper, I felt a strange, quiet, calm wash over me. The irony was that the house was never his to share. He was just a guest who had overstayed his welcome. As I held the document in my hand, I understood that I was not just protecting a structure of wood and stone. I was reclaiming the boundaries of my own life. The morning of the final clearing was surprisingly still. I stood in the foyer, my spine braced, feeling the strength of the silence I had cultivated. When the 12 relatives descended the stairs, their laughter dying out as they noticed the formal envelope resting on the hall table, I simply waited. Marcus walked toward me, his brow furrowed, but the look he saw on my face stopped him dead in his tracks. I handed him the notice. It was a single document, drafted by Mr. Henderson, confirming the legal reality of the trust. As he read, the color drained from his face, replaced by a frantic, jagged confusion. Aunt Sarah pushed forward, demanding to know what kind of game I was playing. But I didn't offer a single word of explanation. I didn't need to. The words on the page were absolute, leaving 0 minutes left for argument or negotiation. The reaction was a mix of shock and defensive indignation. There was no screaming, just the hollow sound of people realizing the ground beneath them had vanished. They began to scramble, packing bags with frantic, messy energy. Marcus tried to step closer, his voice dropping into a desperate, intimate register, but I didn't engage. I just watched them file out, the same way they had arrived, only this time the house felt lighter with every exit. As the front door clicked shut, I didn't feel lonely. I felt, for the first time in a decade, that I was finally home.